Hey everybody, welcome back to Reason for Truth. Steve Garofalo here on vacation in Hilton Head, South Carolina. Today I want to talk to you about 15-minute cities and the Bible. This is by request. A lot of people have asked about 15-minute cities, so today we're going to address it because it's kind of a scary thing, but I want to bring some clarity. But you know this is a Christian station, or it's a Christian channel, so what I want to do today, I want to elaborate on two particular passages, one in the Old Testament, one in the New. They're great examples of why I believe that 15-minute cities are not a good idea, and I'll explain further why. So without further ado, let's just get started. The 15-minute city concept is an urban planning concept in which daily necessities and services, things like where we work, our job, shopping centers, stores, education, schools, healthcare, doctors, and entertainment, right? Movies, plays, whatever we want to do, golf, they'll be reached within 15 minutes. 15-minute walk or a bike ride from any point in the city. Now, 4 tenets of a 15-minute city include, well, let's start by saying this is an ecological transformation. It's based on 4 pillars, I should say, and that is proximity, diversity, I don't know how that plays into it, density, and ubiquity, aiming to fulfill the basic social functions of living, working, supplying care, that's medical, attention, learning, teaching, right, going to school, and just enjoyment, recreation. Now, there's a number of international cities that are implementing this, including Barcelona, Bogota, Buenos Aires, Melbourne, Milan, Italy, Paris, and Portland. And this is all with the aim of inspiring other local governments around the world to use the design according to their own approaches. Now, I say that because not all 15-minute cities are created the same. There you have the basic tenets. All of them certainly share those basic tenets we just discussed. But there could be looked at and, they could be designed differently. One in Saudi Arabia, which I heard was being built, a very large one, is going to look very different because their values are different than one in Portland, than one perhaps in Milan, okay? Or one in Paris. So this is all seen as a way towards more sustainable, livable, healthy futures called 15-minute cities, right? It's typical words we hear in the media, sustainable, right? So the idea behind that, you can see the green agenda fitting in here. The idea behind the concept is to build cities in such a way that most daily necessities and services are located within a 15-minute walk or a bike ride, as we just said. Now, here's some fears about 15-minute cities. A lot of people are fearful, and I think rightfully so. At present, listen, as a disclaimer, the government's not saying we're going to do this, but we know what happens when mankind gets control, right? They tend to assert more control over time, so I think it's reasonable that these fears are probably at some point, whether that's a year or 10 years or 20 years, are going to play out in a growing fashion. But the fear of these 15-minute cities are that governments will bar people from using their cars, eating meat, perhaps allowing them to eat wonderful things like fake meat and bugs, or traveling outside of their assigned districts, right, their city or a close city by maybe at the most, believing that making man the government, the keepers of all things, government and man, right, including what's moral and what's not. That's the diversity piece. And I think I personally believe that's exactly what they'll lead to. But looking no further than the virus lockdown, we could see that was a role play for a typical 15-minute city. It's just what happens when you lock people up. You tell them they can't go where they can shop, what they can eat, I guess, to a certain extent, can't exercise, right, those types of things. That's, I think, a role play or a little bit of a pre-advanced view of what you might expect in the long run. Now, there's some proclaimed benefits as well. We'll talk about that because I think some of the benefits for an older person who doesn't have the means, hey, it's very convenient. They can get around close by all the things, don't have to be worrying about driving. How about a young person who can't afford a car? Well, that's kind of covered in there too. 15 minutes, get your bike out. We see bikes used throughout Europe and Asia, but they don't mandate it. They just say people just figure out it's a better way and a more affordable way of getting around. Furthermore, it's been said that there are already 15-minute cities that were used in the past during World War II, right? During the Nazi occupation in 1941. Supposedly, from what I've read, the Nazis introduced the death penalty for going out of your district area. Well, it's kind of the same concept. All this being said, we look at two biblical examples, of penning people up and centralizing government and power. And that's a big piece of this, is centralization. Centralization, businesses do that, warehouses do that. It's the way they save money. Instead of having five warehouse managers, you could have one big one, and maybe an assistant warehouse manager. We'll see that. But also with people. You want to centralize power, you centralize people and resources. That's how you control. Decentralize, which is what America was based on, the United States. It's not designed to be one controlled place like out of Washington, D.C., one control center, but each state has its own, for that matter, each local municipality has its own police, has its own laws, its own rules that fit into the higher, right? City laws fit into the county fits into the state fits into the country. But it was never designed to be one central place that's top down but bottom up, okay? Now, let's look first at the Tower of Babel. I think it's a good example, Genesis 11, in the New International Version. I want to look at that. And it says this: now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered." Right? Let me read that. "Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building, and the Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them. That's the key. Let me read that again. Verse 8, "So the Lord scattered them from there over the earth, and they stopped building the city." They stopped centralizing. This is why it's called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. I think this is really important because, God will decentralize our centralized efforts, okay, when we do that. And He'll bring confusion. In an article by Bible.org called "Confusion, the Great Dispersion," and those are the two examples that I want to look at, is not only the Tower of Babel, but also interchange these things. Remember, after Acts, the Christians got together, they created these communes where they lived together. And the problem is, God said, "You're not being salt and light." Jesus, the last thing He said, "Go out to the whole earth, make disciples." That means being salt and life, and salt and light. So, listen, historical insight, one of the most amazing phenomena of human history is the strange fact that despite the essential biological unity, this is what the article says, of all nations and races, there are more than 3,000 different languages among men. Each language is significantly different from all the others, and is often true the more primitive tribes use the more complex languages. I think that's phenomenal, because why is that? It's because when you have more spoken language, they have to simplify so everyone can be more centralized. Go to Sicily, where my dad's from, there's a ton of different dialects, many different dialects. And if you go from my mom, we went there years ago, my mom said she barely understood 20% of what was spoken in Rome. But when she got to Sicily, I watched her with my dad's aunt, who was over 80 years old at the time, and boom, kicked right in, because that dialect is so different. Seems evident to me that man seeks to pen up other human beings to control them, albeit through slavery, government, socialism. But eventually God hears the cry of His people, and He disperses them, He confuses them, right? He scatters them. That's called the dispersing. It leads us to our next story, which we just talked about a little bit about, called the Great Dispersion. We just addressed that in Acts. And, I just want to say in Acts, to go back, you want to connect those two biblical stories. Babel, God dispersed them because they centralized themselves. That's a great example of a 15-minute city. They wanted to build this big tower so that everything came together under one place, and He scattered them. Same thing in Great Dispersion, though. This time He dispersed the believers, and so that they would go out throughout the whole earth and speak the gospel truth. Two different things, but this, humanly speaking, it's man's desire to want to consolidate. It's comforting to be together. I know that. I mean, it's comforting. But God created the world. We're supposed to tame it. We're supposed to go out to share the love of Christ even in scary places. If we didn't do that, folks, if we had 15-minute cities, we'd have no missionaries, and we wouldn't even step out to share our faith with the people the next town over. So in conclusion, man seeks to continue to consolidate and centralize, right? I think God and the freedoms God gives us, our liberty, our freedom, our space to live, to grow as individuals with free choice. God doesn't force us to choose him or to even love him. He gives us free choice. My conclusion is that 15-minute cities are a comfortable way for humans to be cradled, to be taken care of by the government for their desire to enjoy life more, right? Work hard, work less, I should say. Also, sadly, an excuse to depend on the government for their safety as opposed and their provision, their food to their mouth. God calls, and their energy. God calls Christians, on the contrary, to live in the world, which is a scary place, folks, but to depend on God, to trust in him, to fulfill our mission that each as an individual human being he gives us. I submit in conclusion that 15-minute cities will end up as government-controlled cities for the poor and to be controlled. I don't see them as being safe places in light of sinful mankind's desire to take other people's things, other stuff. You want to know how that works out? Just look at the 15-minute cities that exist already. It's called government housing projects. Are they safe? No. Are they desirable? Not really. Welcome to the future if you partake and you choose to live in a 15-minute city. That's easy. That's on you. My advice is simple. Depend on God, not on others, not on the government for your needs, and certainly not for your wants and your recreation. But if you do, then you may get what you ask for. That's not only the truth, but that's your reason for truth for today. I'm going to sign off. I want to go back, enjoy some time with my family here on this vacation. But I hope you'll read for yourself some of these articles, see for yourself what a 15-minute city is, because this is going to become more and more of a thing, especially as the economy fails and people are really subjugated to live in places that they can afford. And then I want you to look at the Bible and then look at what God's Word says about consolidation and a centralized point under government control and provision, and what he says about providing for yourself. That's the key here to understanding what a 15-minute city is. All right, in closing, make sure, boom, Gonzalo Sinistro, Italian right hook, subscribe to this channel, that you want to join my committee. Do not put it off any. I don't care if you're in Asia, if you're in Africa, because we've got an audience everywhere, every continent of the world, Middle East, Europe, Central South America, and certainly the United States. Join my community today. How do you do that? Just go to StephenGarofalo.com, join up. Most of that's, you can just join for free there. You can support us if you like for $5. You don't need to do that. Handles the operation side of it. God's blessings to you. You know what I say. Watch the 15-minute cities. Let's follow the Bible. But the choice is yours. So God's blessings to you. I'll be your host, Stephen Garofalo, with this is your reason for truth for today.